medicine. I think it comes around really down to the question of, is healthcare a right or a privilege? And I can't remember where I stole that question from. I read it somewhere, and you probably have heard it yourself. But there was a time, clearly in the U.S., that we saw healthcare as a privilege. Everyone did not get equal care, and some people didn't get any care, and it was a privilege to have it. And in Europe, it was a right. But everyone has a basic right. It may not mean you're going to get some of the white glove service that you get somewhere else. I would like to think there's a blend, that we can meet somewhere in the middle, that there are people, especially children, who are going to get really good healthcare coverage, and at the same time respect the work that our companies have to do. We're now talking about $1.5 billion to get a product to marketplace. It takes a lot of effort to educate the healthcare community, and I don't think we get enough credit around that. Most of our customers, the products that they learned about in medical school and residency aren't really being used as much as the more innovative products that are out today. And yes, they spend a lot of time getting that information from journals and going to conferences, but I know that they also lean on healthcare professionals like ourselves to get some of that information as well. And that's very important.
That was Doxie Jordan, and I'm Joe Lemon. Welcome to the Real Value Exchange podcast. So if you guys have been tuning into the past couple episodes, I've been bringing on more people from the industry so we can gain some insights, try to get some clarity and understand where healthcare is going and how it's evolving and some of the things that we've experienced in the past. I just love this space. Obviously, for those that know me, I've been working in this space now for the past 4 years. And previously, I was even motivated to even first get into personal training because, I was just inspired to try to be a better example for people and just help people live healthier lives, right? So, Doxie Jordan, he has a ton of experience, and he's a sales and marketing leader throughout the healthcare industry. He's worked for big pharmaceutical companies. He's obviously led a lot of innovation into the space, and you just heard him talking about just the importance of having innovation come into the space and how that information really spreads. It's not the traditional patterns that a lot of us thought. Even myself, prior to getting involved deeply into healthcare, I had no clue. I just assumed that most doctors and physicians and practitioners got their information from, the latest journals and, the research that comes out through PubMed, or there's some conferences that they go to every year that really lets them know exactly what's happening. But 9 times out of 10, it's word of mouth, and more so, it's like Doxie Jordan and his team of 500 reps in the field. And it's a lot of hand-to-hand and face-to-face conversations that happen at these networking functions or at clinics, and just doing a lot of biz dev. Just the basics of getting the word out. It's really grassroots. So I think you guys will be surprised by that. Had a lot of fun talking to him. This is a selfish conversation because I'm picking his brain on how he's built his team. And we get into a lot of things around, speed versus agility whenever you're building your company. And, this is a guy who's literally delivered more than $1 billion in annual sales for one of his companies. So I'm selfishly asking questions about sales and development and just how to be a better leader, man. And, we get into a lot about extreme ownership as well and working with purpose, which I thought is a right title for this conversation. So you guys will get a lot of it. I'm sure you're going to love this actual conversation. So I'm going to dive right into it. But before we do, I want to get into some house business. So one of the things I'm doing here with the Real Value Exchange podcast is networking and bringing together more and more podcasters. So I've started a small group. I just literally started with a whole bunch of friends of guys who I've been podcasting with and featuring different guests on. So building up a small community of podcasters that are looking for guests. So if you're a guest and you're coming out with a book, or you're making some pivots, or you got some changes in your businesses, or you just want to keep your personal brand relevant and you want to be on the podcast, I highly recommend that you go past the realvalue.exchange and drop in your contact information so we can keep you posted with any podcasters that are looking for guests in whatever industry that you are looking to really speak to. Or vice versa, if you're a podcaster and you're looking for the right guest, that can be difficult. I know about that. And so, just go over to the realvalue.exchange as well and fill out the podcasting form. We would love to hear from you. We're always looking to build our community. Podcasting is a sport that can be lonely if you do it in a closet by yourself or if you go to a studio solo. So why not get the right people on board, join a community, have a whole network of people that you're relying on, that you can easily keep the content flowing seamlessly without doing a lot of manual labor that I was originally engaged in. So with that said, guys, thank you so much for taking the time to kind of drop past the website in advance. And now let's get into today's show. Awesome. Well, you know what? I'm really excited to have Doxie Jordan on the Real Value Exchange podcast this morning. Doxie Jordan is a sales and marketing leader in the healthcare industry. As you guys know, I'm in the healthcare industry, passionate about this space, and it's not every day I get an opportunity to kind of learn from someone that has such an impact. So he's led sales and marketing teams all throughout the space, and he's even led over 500 employees to have high-performing results. So, Doxie, I want to welcome you onto the Real Value Exchange podcast.
Well, thank you, Joe. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, you know what, just so the audience can kind of, get to better know you a little bit. And I like to kind of tap into people's whys out the gate or things that they're passionate about. So do you mind starting there? And then we'll, kind of backtrack our way into understanding how you came up and how you got into the healthcare industry. So what type of things are you really kind of passionate about these days?
Oh, well, that's an excellent question. And, that's something that has changed over time. And that's just part of my maturation period, I do believe. There was a time where I was probably way too focused on myself. And I will tell you, that's not my passion now. It's really helping others. That's where I get the most joy out of just about anything I'm doing. So it may not be unique. I know that's something that you hear from other people. And that's what I learned from other people. Sitting down with mentors and they sharing stories about things that they've done in their career. It's generally less about them accomplishing something that gave them the spotlight that helped them move up. They often will tell you about when they were able to help others and help them move. And when I started to focus more on that, on other people, then I really felt it was a different type of accomplishment. And so I would say that has turned, or I think I used the word pivot before, but that's when things started to turn for me, where I started to understand the importance of wanting to help others. And you can still make a big difference in doing that. So that's one of my passions right now.
I love it. So, you know what? I'm just curious because I feel like I'm just now, as bad as that sounds, just now starting to think about other people. I'm 36. And when I say just now, a couple of years ago, I really started to think bigger than myself. But at what age did that start to turn for you? Just kind of curious about that process.
Yeah, and it's hard for me to give you an age, but I think I'm very similar to what you're saying. It wasn't like it's black and white. Chances are we weren't so focus on ourselves and that, only people we ever thought about was ourselves and we would even do something at the detriment of others. No, that's not what I'm trying to describe.
Right.
But there is a point where things start to tilt in the other direction. I was quite concerned about how much money I was making, what my title was. I don't know. There wasn't a day that stopped. It was just a time when I became more interested in what other people were doing. And then the other thing, too, is partly out of necessity, though, Joe, because as I started to move in my career and got more responsibility, you were talking about leading teams of 500 and more people. You cannot do it on your own. There's no way I could accomplish the things that I was asked to do if it was me doing it on my own. So you have to trust and rely on others. And I found that people are more willing to go that extra mile for the team and even for you individually. If you are giving them that space to do it, and when they accomplish something, make sure you recognize them. So maybe there was still some of that self-preservation in that too, but I got so much more pleasure seeing other people get promoted, other people accomplishing goals. I can remember sitting down with mentees and someone saying, let's work on this, and 6 months later, you can see them on stage giving a dynamic presentation or creating strategic plans for the organization that really pointed us in the right direction. So, Joe, I may not have answered your question very clearly there, but it happened over time. And it's something that wasn't a particular day, but it's something I continue to work on.
That's a perfect response. I mean, honestly, that's kind of what I was looking for because, a lot of times I'm always checking myself because I do get the ego thing happening. I am in sales and marketing and I have metrics that I'm definitely held to, right? And I want to know at what point is it going to pivot totally? But I think I like your response better because it is more of a gray thing and maybe a fading into, you being a little bit more, not so focused on your own numbers and more so trying to help others trying to achieve theirs. So love that response.
Yeah. Well, there's a balance in everything we do. So that's one of the dichotomies of being in business. Now, you still have to have confidence in yourself.
Right.
So it's not to say that, you shrink down to where it's only the light is on other people. I mean, people are looking to you. Your customers are looking to you when you're bringing information to them, Joe. If you're a district manager or any frontline manager, you have 10, 12 people looking to you for direction oftentimes, and they want to see someone who has competence as well as confidence in themselves. So there's a balance.
How did you get started in the whole healthcare space? What kind of drew you to this area?
Now you got to go back to college. So that's a ways ago for me, but I had a college professor, Dr. Dido, and it's really interesting because he just retired this year. I read in one of my alumni books, but nonetheless, he was playing, I think he was playing golf with an executive from a pharmaceutical company back when you can do that. And he said, you should take a look at one of my students. And that led to an interview and I was hired. But that's not the interesting part of the story. I think the more interesting part of it is I was doing an internship my junior and senior year in college, and I was in the B school at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And I had a great opportunity with a leading consumer company. I think it's okay to mention it's Procter & Gamble because I don't have anything negative to say about them. As a matter of fact, that management leadership program they had was world renowned and still is probably today. It maybe not a guarantee, but it's as close as you're going to get to one is going to go into middle to senior management. These were people they identified, young people they identified from around the country. Very selective process to get in. And I spent 3 months in Cincinnati, 3 months in Charlotte, North Carolina, really getting into the work. I'm painting this picture, Joe, because I thought, man, this is great. I was in business school and here's one of the top companies in the world wanting me to go work for them. And I did get an offer that I turned down. And the reason why I turned it down is because when that healthcare company, and it was Park Davis, which later became Pfizer, came to me, I thought about the work that I could do there. And it was that meaningful work, the difference that you can make in people's lives that really is something that it struck me. And that's why I went in that direction. And I understand there's a lot of great products coming from Procter & Gamble. But it was the way that you can just so clearly affect someone's life and their well-being that was really motivating to me. So I started right out of undergrad, almost took a pause to go back to get my MBA. But Pfizer at that time said I can stay with the company. I went back full-time, actually, to get my MBA, but stayed employed with the company. And then more or less rejoined them in a management capacity once my MBA was finished.
How was that process being, consumed, I should say? Well, maybe that's a little bit too harsh of a word, acquired by one of those huge companies like Pfizer. I mean, how was that whole transition while you were working for the other company?
Oh, I was so naive. I really wasn't aware of all that going on around me. I've seen it happen at different levels in my career, and it changes. A lot of it is based on what your vision is, what your scope is. At that time, I was an individual contributor. Mm-hmm. I had a responsibility, one I took very seriously, of going out and educating physicians, trying to convince them of why my product was better than the competition and wanting them to make the appropriate decision so we can get our products used with the appropriate patients. I mean, that's what a pharmaceutical sales rep does. I was really committed to my company, but at the same time, I knew there were other really good products out there in different disease states, and I can go do it somewhere else if I didn't have a job. So that was really my vision. That goes back to your first question, when we were talking about when the focus was on ourselves, when it was on me. as I went through other acquisitions, as I moved on into my career, now you started to see the impact of other people. I've been parts of organizations where I was even part of the decision making as to how many people do we need. And sometimes that means less than we currently have. And you're disrupting many, many lives. And so you can see how the dynamic changed from earlier on. It was, you know what, I have a skill and I can do this almost anywhere. I think probably thought that too arrogantly, but that was my mindset then, versus later in my career is now we need to make changes and we need to be very careful and make what's best for the organization. Of course, you have shareholders, but you also have your internal stakeholders. And I don't even like that word. It makes them sound so artificial. But these are people, and you want to do what's right by them as well. And so mixing all those things together and never losing sight of the patient as well, that's when it became tougher to do, but also rewarding in the end when you look back at some of the decisions that were made.
Yeah. That is a nice way to kind of think about the process there, because, thinking about the end users as well as thinking about the people that you're working with day to day, as well as the actual overall company as a whole, that is something that's very difficult to kind of balance. But I would imagine that your experience coming up probably helped with that. I mean, the fact that you were one of those guys who was on the street and kind of going from office to office and working at meeting your own quotas as a individual. I mean, I'm sure that kind of played into the thought process, maybe even understanding each different person's, role in that mix there.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. At the same time, the opposite of that doesn't mean it's not true either. Let me explain that a little better. You get a certain credibility when you've done the job. So I'm trying to direct and lead people, let's say if I'm in sales or marketing, where I spent most of my career. They know I've done it, so you have some credibility right away. What I found is, suppose you're now put in a position where you haven't done that job, and that happened to me. I became the general manager of the UK and Ireland, and so now I stepped out of having commercial positions before to now quality, compliance, medical affairs, finance is all reporting into me. I don't have that type of experience. I'll go even further. Not only do I have that experience, I don't even have that expertise. So how do you then lead people where, you haven't done it and you're not the expert? They know more than you. And that was a big learning point for me, I tell you, Joe, because the feedback I got, and it took some time for me, I'm sure, before they can give me this compliment, was I started being much more authentic rather than trying to figure out everyone's problem. So I can remember we were really low on recruitment for a pediatric study. So one, we didn't have a lot of experience in pediatrics. I wasn't that familiar with how you do recruiting for clinical trials. So what else could I do but ask questions? And that's what I started to do. And I realized I knew the business well enough. I educated myself on, what my head of medical was doing and what some of the problems were. And my questions led to them figuring out a different way of tackling the issue and turning around our low recruitment. And that was the feedback I got later. It was, you asked me questions that got me thinking differently. And rather than going in and trying to fake it and say, why aren't you doing this or do that because I read some article, but really didn't have the depth, that would have probably led to nowhere. So yes, there's a lot to be said for those who have done it. It gives you that credibility, but there's also that leadership capability of being authentic and asking the right question to be just as important as telling someone what to do.
And so, I'm just really curious too, because I'm going through a similar transition, not on the same scale that you were doing, obviously, but transitioning from sales more into marketing and handling some more of the operations pieces of our business as well, where, of course, being in front of clients, I was passionate about that. I was really close to the patients and, all that stuff kind of fires me up. Right. But now I'm kind of moving away from being on the street as much. How do you kind of deal with those type of role changes and still keeping that same passion?
Yeah, well, don't lose the passion. Because I would argue, particularly in the businesses we're in, the patient should be in the center of everything that we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So whether you're taking it from being on the street, as we've been talking about, educating physicians and other healthcare professionals on how to treat their patient, I mean, that's for the patient in one angle. And in marketing, you have that same responsibility. You may be doing primary or secondary research, but it's to find out what that patient needs. How can I communicate to the physician? What's the positioning of our product? What messages do we need to go out with to resonate with our customers that the salespeople are going to use so we can impact the patient? So, I would say first, don't lose that passion. You just need to redirect it based on the position you hold within the company.
How was it working overseas, being a general manager? Sounds like that was a much newer role and in like a foreign land.
Oh, that was fantastic. Personally and professionally, I really enjoyed living over there. It just really opened my eyes in so many different ways. But really focusing on the business, I told you I was doing something I had never done before. So it's one thing in the commercial organization, yes, I have a budget and I need to manage that budget, but largely my focus was on driving top line sales. I mean, I know and felt very confident in, what things we needed to do that was going to change that number. But now as a general manager, you're looking at many other numbers. I can remember looking at my balanced scorecard. There's about 17 different just financial factors on it that I had to pay attention to. So it's not just top line, but you're managing all the way down, to profitability, looking at margins and EBITDA, and also now managing a broader scope of people. My team there was just over 400, so it wasn't so big. I've managed twice, if not three times that size before,
Wow.
But it was three times more complex. It was one because the healthcare system it's quite different than we have in the U.S. So that was new. I'm now managing new departments, new functions, new areas. So that was new. So it was a wonderful learning experience. I dare to say I may have gotten more out of it than the company did, but it was something that I would strongly encourage people to do. Is if you want to develop yourself, that is certainly a way of doing it.
Well, so my company's based over like in Germany, and you're absolutely right. It definitely is a much different system than what we're currently experiencing here in the U.S., but there's rumbles of how we're trying to kind of have that blend, a little bit of what they're doing, along with, trying to keep some of the same trends that we have. Do you mind just talking about what those differences are a little bit, or maybe at least what you saw between the U.S. healthcare system and?
Yeah, sure. I would love to. It's quite interesting. It's just like the ultimate dinner party conversation that comes up quite frequently. And I can play either side of that. I love being the devil's advocate. And so I've definitely been on both sides, but trying to be in the middle lane here on this. I mean, it is socialized medicine in the UK, and they will tell you that there's no party of any significance in the UK that wants to get rid of the NHS, which is the healthcare service there, the National Healthcare Service. Now, they are very quick to complain about it on different sides of the aisle, but it's not to take it away. But I tell you what, a lesson that I got, I went in with the prejudice thinking it's socialized medicine. You have a single payer, that market access was going to be easy. The government's going to pay for it. And it wasn't that easy. They have what they call clinical commissioning groups over there, over 200 of them. Think of them as little local health economies. And that leads to roughly 125 formularies, some of them grouped together. It's like if you're in Columbus and you're near Cincinnati, well, we're just going to combine our formularies and go for one pitch there. So I learned more about market access in the UK than I did in the US, is what I like to say, even though the healthcare system is different, because there was a lot of direct contracting. And if you don't go through NICE, which is one of the oldest agencies looking at the valuations of pharmaceutical products, and of course you have ICER today, I got my experience with NICE many, many years ago. So it was an interesting dynamic. And I think the ultimate question that I like to ask people, at least, is when you talk about the future of healthcare and the difference between the US system and what you have in different parts of Europe. I mean, Germany and UK and France and Spain, they're all a little different, but still virtually socialized medicine. I think it comes around really down to the question of, is healthcare a right or a privilege? And I can't remember where I stole that question from. I read it somewhere, and you probably have heard it yourself. But there was a time, clearly in the U.S., that we saw healthcare as a privilege. Everyone did not get equal care, and some people didn't get any care, and it was a privilege to have it. And in Europe, it was a right. And I would say it's, they do have disparities of care, less so there, but everyone has a basic right. It may not mean you're going to get some of the white glove service that you get somewhere else. I would like to think there's a blend, that we can meet somewhere in the middle, that there are people, especially children, who are going to get really good healthcare coverage. And at the same time, respect the work that our companies have to do. We're now talking about $1.5 billion to get a product to marketplace. It takes a lot of effort to educate the healthcare community, and I don't think we get enough credit around that. Most of our customers, the products that they learned about in medical school and residency aren't really being used as much as the more innovative products that are out today. And yes, they spend a lot of time getting that information from journals and going to conferences, but I know that they also lean on healthcare professionals like ourselves to get some of that information as well. And that's very important to the patient and to the whole healthcare system.
I think that's a great point that you brought that up, because that is so true. It was one of the things that kind of blew me away when I first got into the space almost 5 years ago. And, it's something that I just kind of took for granted whenever I wasn't working in healthcare, that, of course, they're being taught this in school, or there's conferences where they're getting all the latest and greatest knowledge. And you think that there's this nice streamlined place where all the actual healthcare professionals go and figure out what's the latest and best and greatest technology out there. But it's not the case at all. It's very fragmented, right? And it definitely comes down to the companies to be able to have that conversation and be able to convey that message, over various platforms. So
you're exactly right.
And it's pretty interesting that it takes $1.5 billion. I mean, man, I mean, bringing a brand new product to market has to be one of the most challenging things to kind of do, I would imagine.
Yeah, it is. And
have you had experience doing that,
so.
Doxie?
Bringing products to market? Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And that's been a really fun experience. I've launched 5 different products in my career at different stages. There have been times where I was, again, that front line where I'm introducing it to my customers for the first time, been able to do it from marketing where you're trying to figure out what's the right message, what's the right positioning. How do you take the TPP, that's the product profile, and build out the plan that's going to help this product be understood and ultimately be used. So yeah, I've had the chance to see it at different angles, and it's one of the more exciting things that you can do, particularly from a commercial viewpoint in healthcare.
Awesome. Well, yeah, having an opportunity to have at least 5 of those experiences is pretty cool. I'm sure that you learned a lot from those processes of each time, and this is kind of where I like to really kind of press in a little bit too. So, I would love to kind of share just maybe 1 or 2, big life moments that really happened to you around business and things that you had to work really hard to kind of achieve, but you were able to kind of get to that goal. We'd love to kind of hear about that process for the audience so we can all kind of take away some jewels from you.
Yeah, sure. When you say life lesson, to me, that generally means something that you messed up, that I screwed up. And yes, there are plenty of those. And I can tell you one that really pops to mind as you say that. And if you don't mind, I'm going to keep us across the pond, as they like to say, and put us back in Europe. Because it was the morning of June 23rd. Actually, it was the morning of June 24th, because I believe the Brexit vote was June 23rd of 2016. And that was a pivotal time in my career because I was so unprepared for it. I got to Europe in 2014 in that role that I was just talking about as GM. And unfortunately, the business wasn't doing so well. And it was a turnaround situation. And my first year, I was feeling really happy for what the team was able to accomplish. We had really turned around the business and was moving in the right direction. Year two, same thing was happening. First half of the year, we were, I think we were growing about 3 times the European benchmark. So wow. Wonderful growth that we were experiencing. And then Brexit happened. And especially here in the U.S., many people may not remember, and I hope I can remember the numbers, but in a few months, you saw the currency drop by 20%. So that means, the government is now paying 20% more for the medicines. It means that we are selling 20% less because of that currency fluctuation. It even meant that our employees are making 20% less in their paychecks because they didn't have that buying power. And there was just so much ambiguity now because we didn't have a plan B. And that's really what the learning point, that life lesson was, is just having that plan B. I was listening to a lot of the, prognosticators out there were saying that Brexit was not going to pass, meaning that the UK was going to stay within the European Union. And that was not only the steady state, that was, yes, there's no chance that this vote's going to happen. Now, I can make myself feel better, and trust me, I've done it several times by saying, not only wasn't I prepared, but other pharma companies weren't, other industries and other business leaders weren't. The government really wasn't prepared. The prime minister even resigned shortly after that. And I listened to an interview where he was saying he just did not have a vision that the vote was going to go that way. But the life lesson for that, as I was sharing with you, is that something that big, that carried that much risk to our business, then I do believe I should have had more of a plan. And it was a little embarrassing because, the CEO came over to the UK shortly thereafter. And I couldn't do any more than just give him a report of what happened because I didn't have a plan of what to do. The chairman of the board actually lived in the UK, and, he even came calling, what can I do to help? What is there to do? And I didn't have that plan in place. I think I've said that several times now, and I think he understands it. Now, also what I learned in that too is you can't overcorrect for things either. You have risk assessments, but you can't live just in, okay, what's plan B and plan C, and you do your scenario planning, but you don't want to lose some of the things that make you good. In my case, I thought that was being fast, having an agile organization, having a sense of urgency. You don't want to lose that because you have everyone saying, well, what if? But you have to find that balance. And that was something that it took me months to turn around. When I say to turn around, what I mean by to change our focus, because my goal or our goal was we had a number we had to hit, and generally, I love putting this is what we need to do, and here it is, and I love to quantify it and then qualify how we're going to get there. And things changed. It was okay. You know what? We weren't going to hit that number. I knew that in July. We weren't going to hit the number anymore. But what can we do to make sure we get our products to our patient, that we're growing our business, that we're being competitive, that also we're taking care of our employees? Because guess what? There was roughly, I want to say it was 25% of our employees were not British nationals. And so they were concerned about, am I going to get kicked out of the country? And so we had to set up a small team to just investigate that. My HR director was out there trying to figure out, how do I make sure our people are going to get kicked out of the country tomorrow? So the ultimate mission did not change, but the things we worked on did. And that was just an incredible moment that, you can read about that stuff. You can do case studies about it, but when you're in the midst of it, having that type of turmoil in the business was a learning experience for sure.
Yeah. I mean, and I'm just thinking about that as you're kind of walking through that story, and it's just like, I feel like that was so far out of your control. I mean, it literally was a vote that was happening in like another country. There wasn't any information coming your way that would kind of give you some warning signs. I mean, because I do remember those. I mean, I'm just, briefly watching the news, and you would see, different updates, and then everybody was shocked. I mean, everybody thought the whole country was shocked for like Brexit. So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, it's really interesting that you still found, I mean, in hindsight, of course, but still, you still saw some opportunities for you to kind of have a plan B with something that was
Yeah.
so far out of your control. Yeah, I think that's awesome. I think that's a pretty interesting
Mm-hmm.
insight to have.
But that relates to, let's go back to the rep, because I think we keep going back to the local representative. For instance, if you're a pharma rep, you could be in industrial supplies, chemicals, or whatever
Mhm.
what have you. Everything isn't equal. So you're right. I didn't cause the vote to go one way or the other.
Mhm.
But just like if you're in a certain part of the country that the population shifts, where more people are leaving your state or your geography versus some other places where the geography is growing. I mean, there are inherent advantages and disadvantages here in the U.S., just about in every industry, and no matter what you're doing within that industry. So it's not to pass blame or to make excuses to say, well, this person has a better territory than me, or I have this advantage or disadvantage. It's to say, what I have, what can I do with it?
Yeah.
I can tell you, I've been in situations where I've grown the business. Like I was part of the company where we had 40 consecutive quarters of double-digit growth. I mean, that's incredible.
Wow.
And some wonderful work was done by a lot of people, and I contributed to that. But I can tell you, I was just as productive, if not more so, that I had a bigger impact when we were growing at -1% to 1% during this Brexit period. So it's putting in balance, because I recognize what was handed to us, or that situation, versus being another situation where you're taking advantages of some of the environmental impacts that are happening around you.
Yeah. You know, that whole like mindset of not taking not looking for your way outs, right? And taking that 100%
Mm-hmm.
ownership over what you can control. Yeah, I think that's a great takeaway for the actual audience. At least that's what I'm getting from it. And you know, I think I
Mm-hmm.
really want you to press in a little bit more too on this idea of staying agile with your company. I heard you mention it a little bit. Any thoughts about how leaders can really do that and keep their company, you know, especially when you got so many people and you're trying to manage a huge team? How do you stay agile in that process?
Yeah, to me, it's just making myself conscious of it, because I can tell you where I tend to work. I'm someone who likes to plan, and you have the plan and you work the plan. And for me, it was listening to people around me who were saying, things are changing. This has changed. And again, I mentioned the word, dichotomy. And I think it's so important, because it's not to say that every time you hear someone say, hey, this is changing, it doesn't mean the strategy needs to change. At the same time, just because you have a strategy, if you're not agile and flexible enough to see that there are some changes that need to be addressed, and that's where the art comes into the work that we do. And so often, at least for me, and you speak for myself here, I tend to think of the science. I'm comfortable with the numbers, and you try to create these beautiful models and these very interesting PowerPoint presentations that are very logical and look very rational. But there's an art that happens in marketing and sales, especially, where you have to say, this thing is moving more than this other thing over here. And yes, that is a risk, but it's probably going to impact the organization very little and may not happen. This looks different to me, and we need to make sure we're ready for it. So that's just part of the agility. I feel as though that I'm not giving you or your listeners here the exact thing that you need to look to agility. I just know that healthcare is changing so much. Mm-hmm. And to me, it's just ridiculous to think that we're going to do the same thing over and over again, and we're going to stay up with all that change. Yeah.
Well, I mean, honestly, I really like the idea of what you were saying about listening, because that is a big part of the art piece of it, right? Like a lot of times when we're head down, we're focused on executing day in, day out. Like there's metrics that I'm sure all of us have that we have to hit on a regular basis and, monthly. And then you kind of push it out to the year. And sometimes you could turn your ears off. You could turn off understanding of what people are really experiencing. And that's the art piece, right? I mean, that you're kind of speaking towards whenever it comes to being agile. And easy to kind of miss. I've done it.
Yeah. I
So,
think part of it too, Joe, is also having the understanding of how I like to work.
yeah.
And it was having that diversity of people around me who I know think differently. I know how I like to solve problems. And that's why I love to get someone around me, very close to me on my team, or even someone I can just bounce off ideas, who think differently, that are just much more, their mind is just more creative than mine. And so I like having that experience. And that's one of the big advantages of having a diverse a team, is that you can use the different way of thinking. And I believe that's one way that's going to keep a company and a team really agile.
I mean, honestly, having those diverse thoughts are becoming mandatory, right? Because there's so much information, and how do you consume it in like a, appropriate fashion? Because if you only have one mindset on an actual team, or people with like a certain background or, thought process, it's so easy just to miss so many things that are being thrown at us today. So, but just trying to mix in the actual being agile with the actual speed part. Can you speak to that as well? Because, definitely have to stay agile, but in like healthcare, so many things are changing as we've been saying, but you have to kind of respond with a certain amount of speed. Are there any keys that maybe I should be looking for as a person who's trying to lead my team as far as how we can keep the speed with those changes?
From my perspective, is understand the definitions. Speed and agility, I hear those things being used together all the time, and they're very different. Speed is just that. It's how fast can I do something? Once a decision is made, we decide that we're going to do X. How quickly can we get that up and running? How fast can we operationalize it? That is one thing. Agility is something totally different. Agility could be that same X project, whatever that may be, saying, well, we need to change the way we're going to work within it. You can be agile and very slow. And so that's, now you're really looking into my personality here. It's where I can be quite exact in some things. But, I value both. But one of the things that I see missing the most in organizations is the agility on the more, and I would say internal, on the corporate side. And what I'd like to see in sales, where I thought was a big advantage, was the speed. Once we've determined where we want to go, how quickly can we get there? So,
that's great.
I would say, make sure we understand which one we're talking about. Words mean something, and let's make sure we're all have the same definition.
You're right. Especially being agile. I mean, agile is a piece of the business where a lot of us don't really spend time looking at it. And it definitely has that actual art piece to it. And, speed is something I'm constantly talking about with the team. How fast can we get up and running? We're trying to bring on brand new reps, develop brand new territories. And, I'm normally speed focused, right? Because it's so easy just to have metrics around speed. At least for me, it is, I can say, okay, bring this person on, ramp up time is this, and all those basic conversations that I'm sure you've been having for decades now. And so agile part is something that I'm definitely learning how to kind of really bring on myself more of. So appreciate those thoughts.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And so, since you've worked with such large teams, how do you go about identifying people that are passionate and like good fits for the actual company? Any keys there?
Yeah, no, I most certainly do. I'll start with how I used to do it, and then evolve to, I think, a better way of doing things. I used to look very heavily on past performance. If you could show and demonstrate that you were successful in other companies, for instance, if we're hiring from outside, or if I can look within the company for a promotion, someone who's, have 7 consecutive years of, being in the President's Club, then that was the thing that stood out most for me. I've evolved from that, in part because of what I just talked about before, where understanding different people have different advantages. And so I'm now more interested in having a diverse team. So you're still going to pick people that can demonstrate success, But what's the difference of someone who's been to 5 presidents clubs versus 4? To me, I would argue not a big difference if they've both been employed like for 10 years. To me, that person who has 4 may have overcome more things. They may have been able to transform a territory that had been historically bad, and the other person inherited one that had been historically good. There's if you don't mind me getting a little long-winded here, my apologies, but I think it's a very fascinating study that was done. And what the researchers did is they had people play Monopoly. College students play Monopoly, except they didn't start with everyone being equal. They would take one person and say, give them $400 to start, and the other person got $100 to start. The next group that played, you got Park Place and Boardwalk with hotels, and someone else got no property. And then they started the game, and you wouldn't be surprised to find that people who had the advantages, they won most often. But the big lesson, the thing I remember from the article the most was then they were asked the question, why did you win? And you may not be surprised to hear the people who won, they said, well, I was more strategic. I took advantage of this opportunity where my other person didn't. Hardly anyone went to the fact that, well, my territory had advantages or my game or had advantages versus theirs. And so I'm not saying that the whole system is rigged. That's not my point. The point is I'm more interested in seeing what did you do with what you had. You may have come into an area that wasn't as competitive or had some issues, and you turned it around. And if you can take something that was losing 10% and have it growing 10%, man, that's a wonderful story to share with people. If you can show that you had people who weren't engaged in your organization, and now you have people who are engaged, having fun and meeting their goals, to me, that just means more. So now getting back to answering your question more directly, I'm looking for that success, but I'm much more interested in how people got there, not just the end result.
Yeah. I find it really interesting that people wouldn't acknowledge that they had certain advantages in that actual case study that you just mentioned there. I think it's really cool, though. Did you ever see anybody that was on your team that kind of took on that actual mindset as well, where they were like playing the game very strategically? Obviously, I'm talking about the work game here, but they also understood that they had the best territory. Was that something that kind of came up where you kind of saw those guys kind of excel to understand both sides of what they had going on?
Yeah, except it was a really success story. So there was a presentation that I had given at a POA meeting once, and you can almost tell the theme of it was it the man or woman? Was it the man, the plan, or the land? And essentially it was a question where you had one state, it was Texas, and where we identified 5 zip codes that was generating so much business for the organization that I could justifiably put 80% of my resources there. I'm maybe exaggerating a little bit. A lot of the resources there just to make sure we went in those 5 zip codes. Now, there's something that I remember that RBD, the sales director down there, he embraced that. He took that as, yeah, give us the resources so we can win. We want to make sure we're beating the competition. So often we're focused on beating our own colleagues. So often how am I performing in Des Moines versus someone in San Antonio or versus someone in Richmond, Virginia? That is so wrong. I mean, those are good benchmarks, and we should use them because it helps level set as we look at our performance. But that's not our mission. That's not what most of the people I meet are not passionate about beating someone 2 zip codes away, or that's just not it. Instead, we want to beat the competition. Actually, I want to beat the disease, and I want to do so better than my competition. And so those same advantages in those 5 zip codes in Texas are the same advantages that our competition has. And so he put his mind on, I'm not worried about how well I'm doing versus my colleagues. I want you guys to help me. I want to help you. How do we make sure that we are best situated to beat the competition here in these 5 zip codes? So it's taking that situation that, man, they could have really gone in the wrong direction and channeling it in a positive way.
Oh man, the man, the plan, or the land. I love that. I gotta make sure that I have more conversations about that because you're right. There are certain territories that are phenomenal, and it's like, you could take maybe somebody from the bottom 20%, put them in that territory, and they'll produce, right? Because it is the land. But we do look at our own team as the actual enemies, and it's the total wrong way to look at it. I've been there before, and I'm really glad that you actually shared that because it kind of woke me up a little bit as well. So thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks
and the real answer is it takes, and I would say this in closing though, it takes all 3. The answer to that question in my mind isn't that it's one versus the other. It really is all 3 of those things, but sometimes we just don't weight it appropriately. I have a mentee now who has taken over a district and she's doing phenomenally well. And I know it's because she has a plan and that she's working that plan and she's engaging her people. She's spending time with them and giving them the right direction. So all these things, all of those matter. And it's just having that visibility and understanding of that, I think, which gives someone the advantage to do really well.
Yeah, I love it, man.
Yeah.
So what's your thoughts on the future of healthcare in the U.S.? I know you have a lot of experience and you've seen it kind of take on different shapes. Any thoughts on where we're going here?
Yeah, well, we talked about the right of privilege, and I think that's a question that we as a society have to answer. I do believe it's going to be somewhat of a blended answer. I'm really curious to see where it goes. I just know that we as pharmaceutical manufacturers and innovators are bringing medicines, really wonderful medicines to people's lives that we need to make sure we have a voice in. It was just a couple of years ago, I was at a New Year's Eve party and I was in a small group. I probably knew 10% of the people there. Obviously I knew the host, didn't know a lot of the other guests there. And I was talking to a woman who was an executive at a big energy company. And when I say executive, she was at the executive level. She was talking about giving a speech. And I don't even know why she shared this with the group, but I just happened to be in this small circle. And she talked about having a hypoglycemic moment on stage where she started to phase out right in the middle of her presentation. She said it happened to her twice.
Wow.
And she went to her doctor, and physicians do a wonderful job. In this case, according to her, her physician wasn't, because he just kept her on the same medicines and told her that she needed to balance her diet better. But it was one of the nurses there in the office who said, there's a new product. Maybe we should change it. Let me talk to the doctor. Long story short, she got her medicine changed, and she was talking about how great it was to this small group standing there. And she ended up trying to say the name of the product, and it was very close to the name of a product that we had recently launched. And I said, I work for that company. And she came over across this little semicircle we had and gave me a hug and said, your product has changed my life.
Wow.
And that's been 3-4 years ago, and I'm still emotional just thinking about it. My point being is we do so many great things for patients, for the whole healthcare system, and we deserve a voice in what this new system is going to look like. And so does the patient, so does the healthcare professional, so does government. And it's just, that's the thing that concerns me the most, because that's just organizing all these different voices together to make sure that we're listening to each other and figuring out what's going to be best for ultimately the patient. That's a tough thing to do. So I just want us to make sure that we stand up, we speak loudly, and continue to do things in the right way, that our efforts are appreciated.
100%. I mean, what's so interesting about these days is that everybody has a microphone, like myself, and everybody can amplify their actual voice and really spread it further than than it's ever been able to actually go before. And that's a huge advantage, but there's so many voices now, and how do we organize those thoughts and make sure that we're doing what's best for the end user, right? I mean, because of course I have my I have my views and I have my ways that I would love to see happen for a couple different reasons, but at the end of the day, it's just about the people that we're trying to serve, right? In the future here in the
I hope
US
so
as well.
too. Yeah, and we're going to have to do it collectively. I mean,
Right.
is making sure that we can bring people together so to have a voice, because things are changing, and we would like to be part of that change as well.
That's awesome. So Doxie, we are getting ready just to kind of close out here, but I mean, what's next for you? I mean, obviously you've been doing sales and marketing for quite some time. You got a lot of wins under your belt. What type of things do you have kind of lined up for yourself in the future?
Yeah, well, I'm really excited about the future. We relocated back to the U.S. just last year. And so my main thing now going forward is that meaningful work. And we started our conversation this morning talking about helping others and tying those two things together, knowing that I'm doing something meaningful. It's hard to be in healthcare and not do that. But that's making sure you have the right people around you. We have the right goals. We're out there changing things for the better for patients and for the organization, and an opportunity to bring people along on that journey. That's what I look forward to.
Meaningful work. Yeah. You know what? That might be the actual title of the show.
All right.
I love that. So you know what? As we close out, please tell people how they can find you if they want to speak to you. And it definitely sounds like you're also helping out some other leaders in the whole healthcare space as well. Is that right? Doing some mentoring?
Well, yes, I try to. So I really enjoy that. But if people want to find me, they can go to my LinkedIn page and put in my name, Doxie Jordan, or if it's the /IN /Doxie Jordan, that's Doxiejordan. Just treat it as one word, and my page will come up.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, Doxie, this has been a pleasure talking to you this morning. I really appreciate all the thoughts that you've kind of put out there, and I've definitely learned a lot myself along the way. I mean, just getting into that process of not losing sight of the work that we're trying to do, not making it about trying to compete with my actual team members, even though I always want to kind of own my actual territory and I always want to be number one. But let's not forget that we're up to something that's so much bigger than us just trying to be at the very top of the actual leaderboard. So thank you for all that insight this morning, man. I definitely appreciate your time.
Hey, well, it was fun.
And just like that, guys, it is a wrap. So thank you so much for tuning in to the Real Value Exchange podcast. As always, you can connect with Doxie in the show notes below. So I have links to his LinkedIn page, and that's probably the easiest way to find him. And if you're looking for guests, or if you are a podcaster and you want to get your word out about yourself, let's talk. I'm always looking to feature other podcasters. I think we gotta keep each other tight right here, right? So feel free to reach me at any major platform. I'm at Joe Alex Lemon. Wherever you are, Instagram, LinkedIn, you name it, Snapchat, TikTok now. So yeah, I try to play around on all the platforms, but feel free to reach me there. And until next time, you guys be phenomenal.